The Lord be with you. We're reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. On that day, as evening drew on, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us cross to the other side." Leaving the crowd, they took Jesus with them in the boat just as he was, and the other boats were with him. A violent squall came up, and waves were breaking over the boat, so that it was already filling up. Jesus was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. They woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up, rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, "Quiet, be still." The wind ceased, and there was great calm. Then he asked them, "Why are you terrified? Do you not yet have faith?" They were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this whom even the wind and the sea obey?" The Gospel of the Lord. So in the pews there, you have the bulletin for this week. And on the bulletin cover is Rembrandt's famous image of the gospel that we just heard, a painting he created when he was 29 years of age. So if you look at the image, and there's also images on the font as well, you've got Peter and Andrew on the left side, standing. They're swayed by the wind in the front of the boat. Peter is up in the rigging, trying to control the sail. He's fighting, and his arms are stretched out, his muscles are tense. On the other side, Jesus is there. You see the halo, and he's sort of hanging out, relaxed. And John, the beloved disciple, is next to Jesus. And interesting, those near to Jesus are relatively calm, except for the one you might have noticed throwing up, retching over the side of the boat. But the further we get away from Jesus, the further they got away from Jesus, the more people are anxious, fighting, struggling against the wind and the storm. Notice the difference of the light on the left side and the right side. Peter, he's got the red shirt on the top there. Peter, maybe he's wearing a red shirt because he was only a cardinal at that point, not the future pope. But he can't see the light that's breaking from the parting and dissipating clouds on the left side behind him, because he's focusing only on the storm itself on the right side of the scene. The anxious disciples on the left don't know and can't see that Jesus is already disbanding the storm. So in this picture, Rembrandt painted himself into the scene as if he had been there 1,600 years earlier. He's the only character looking out at the audience, looking out at people, looking out at us, saying in effect artistically, which character best symbolizes you and me in the midst of the storm, the storms of life. In other words, where would we have been then in the boat, in that storm, and where are we now in the difficulties and the challenges in the storms of life? Are you and me like Peter and Andrew, trying to fight the storms on our own without knowing, without feeling, without recognizing that Jesus is there? Or are we like the beloved disciple John, sitting next to Jesus in relative peace and serenity, knowing that he's there in all of the situations and the storms of life? The point of this is the closer we get to Jesus, the calmer and the more peaceful we can be in the storms, in the challenges, in the struggles of life. It's such a definitive and provocative and powerful measure of our spiritual progress, of how we deal with crises and how we deal with the issues and struggles and the problems in our own lives. The more we can approach the various situations of life with peace and calm, the closer that we know that we are to Jesus. So this gospel narrative reminds us that, in one way or another, we're always crossing some sea, carried along in the boat, in our bodies, in our families of our lives. So what can the sea represent to us? Maybe the sea right now could be a transition from one stage of life to the next. Maybe it's a transition from adolescence to adulthood, or from being single to being married, or from being married to being widowed, from being healthy to being ill, from being like Father Joe Schlafer, retiring this week but coming here to curate, just like Father Zach, to live in active retirement. Or the sea could also represent some life experiences through which we're trying to sail through and get through, that we're living. So becoming parents or grandparents, changing careers, changing situations, or finding the courage to abandon a dependence on alcohol or drugs or something else and move toward freedom and healing. The more you think about it, the more certain we know that we're often crossing to the other side, crossing a sea, at least metaphorically, from one side, from one shore to another. And so this beautiful gospel invites us to listen, to reflect upon the story of our lives. Large and small storms show up, many times unexpected, but show up, they do. Coming to church, as important as it is, being faithful in prayer, unfortunately, doesn't shelter us from life storms. Living and practicing our faith can and does give us the strength and the courage and the direction to weather our storms and to withstand the outcomes. Our faith isn't a guarantee that we won't go under, as it were, but it's a promise that even if we're near to drowning or being swamped in some way or another by something, Jesus is with us. Nevertheless, not every storm of our lives is miraculously silenced at Jesus' command. In between the message today, as I was reflecting on this homily, I thought after one of the messages that just before communion, you always hear, "Behold the Lamb of God, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." Well, yes, we say takes away the sins of the world, but we don't say takes away the storms of the world, the storms of our lives. Yet there are these ups and downs that can be transformed by the abiding presence of love and faith that disarms fear. So where does that leave us? Each of us has been booked, as it were, by God on a passage across the sea of life in the boat that is our bodies, that is our families, that is our communities. And a famous preacher once said, "I would rather be with Jesus in the storm than without Jesus in fair weather." How true. Nonetheless, who wouldn't be troubled as we hear this gospel passage or as we experience ourselves by the fact that Jesus was sleeping through the storm? And don't we sometimes demand, rightly so, with the apostles, "Don't you care? Where are you?" In the first reading from the book of Job, God is almost totally silent for the majority of the book. And here in St. Mark, God's Son is sleeping. Well, it's really our job, like Job, to search for God when the Lord seems distant and aloof. But the fact is, why does St. Mark have this here? Jesus' sleeping is a reminder that God hardly ever intervenes in our lives without an invitation, without a request to help us through this storm, this life, this difficulty, this challenge. Faith is certainly a leap in the dark, especially in stormy times. Faith isn't a scientific experiment that can be quantified. It's not God proving himself by a miracle. Faith is being there in the boat, struggling like Peter, demanding to know if God cares about our struggles, but hearing and being attentive to his answer. Quiet. Be still. Why are you terrified? So don't push God away by blaming him. He didn't do it. Don't accuse God of not caring. But he did say, let us cross over to the other side. Let's move on. And let us take, and as he says, take the journey with me and, in the end, to stay the course.